folks, it is Do Technology with Heather and Joanne happening whenever we can manage to make it happen for the last 5 or 6 years. Sorry about that. There are 2 live streams. That's my fault. But this obviously is the right one. So we have been trying to get together. I've been on the road and we've been talking about a lot of stuff, but something happened today that Joanne was like, we got to talk. So take it away, Joanne, and I'll pick it up.
Okay. I mean, there are so many things that one could see. And then my response would be, Heather, we've got to talk. But in this case, it was on some social media platform. I don't know which one, but it was Stephen Miller announcing that the January 6th, the people who were charged with crimes related to January 6th had been denied due process. Totally unfair. We need to talk about due process. And I thought, okay, he clearly is assuming people reading this have no idea what due process is.
So let me stop just a minute and explain who Stephen Miller is.
Yes.
Stephen Miller is the deputy White House chief of staff. And he's the guy who is all the words going through my head. He's the guy who wants to get rid of all Black and brown people from America. And he's he's the very, 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 very anti-immigration guy who wants to use the strength of the federal government to get rid of all immigrants. So what he said, it was started, I think, on X, but it's been everywhere today, which is April 21st, that it was crazy for people to talk about due process because the January 6th people didn't get due process. And that was so out there that obviously Joanne's like, I don't care that I'm teaching. Let's talk about this.
Yes, no, I wanted to talk about it because it's beyond frustrating. So Heather, why don't you start us off by actually defining what due process is?
Well, so the important thing to understand here is that if you live in the United States of America, or if you are in the United States of America, you don't have to be a citizen, you don't have to be a legal resident. If you are in the United States of America, by the Constitution, you have the right to due process. And what due process means is a number of things. First of all, the government cannot simply throw you in prison. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't on occasion, but when it does do that, you have the right to petition the government to be let out of jail unless they charge you. That's if you sometimes hear the words, the writ of habeas corpus or just habeas corpus, that is loosely translated as free the body. But if the government believes that you have committed a crime, it has to charge you with something. It has to have specific charges against you. And then if the government charges you with something, you have the right to produce evidence and to produce testimony and to have a lawyer. That's fairly new, the whole lawyer thing. That's mid 20th century. And to have a lawyer present that material in front of a jury. And you have a right to have your case heard and to you either be convicted or to be found not guilty. Now, critical to that is the idea that you stand on the same basis as everybody else does in America. So when people are complaining about due process and somebody getting due process, it doesn't mean that they believe the person is guilty. It doesn't mean that they think the person is innocent. It doesn't mean any of those things. It means that we, all of us who stand on this soil, have the right to the due process of the law. And you cannot have your property taken or your life taken or be imprisoned without that due process, even if you are, the worst of the worst. And in fact, Joanne, I think it's time for you to take it away because John Adams established this in the early years before the Revolution.
Well, actually, I mean, he did in a sense, promised or perform, I suppose, due process to the British soldiers who took part in the Boston Massacre. The Boston Massacre on the streets of Boston, there were soldiers in Boston who were there because Massachusetts, Boston had been protesting against the king. We're going to come back to protesting against the king. And there was a brief skirmish and Americans were shot, and this went to trial. And John Adams stepped forward to represent the British troops that were on trial because he felt that, again, due process, everyone deserved a fair trial before the law. And he did indeed perform that for them. The important point here being related to what you just said, Heather, is it's totally possible, and it happens, that people don't get the proper due process or something is skipped over. But the fact of the matter is that is there as a standard, unquestioned, that you can point to and demand your rights. Just like the rule of law, that there are laws that join us all together and we are all responsible to follow those laws. And if we don't, then we're liable to prosecution or perhaps a trial. But the point is, these standards, these laws, due process are there in part so that we know we have that right. They stand there at that right. So that if we feel that we are being mistreated or misused, that stands there. We can avail ourselves of that. We all know that as not just the citizens, but the people in the United States, we have that right.
Yes. And so where we are right now is that the administration is suggesting that it doesn't have to go through due process for people, undocumented people who were in this country. The administration has simply declared that a number of the people that they that they sent to El Salvador were criminals, rapists, murderers, and so on. Although a study by Bloomberg has turned up the fact that 90% of those people had no criminal records in the United States. And what the administration came back with was, well, that just proves they're really good criminals because we haven't caught them yet. And the problem with that is that if you take away the ability of those people to go through their rights, that they're through due process, the only word we have that says that they're bad people or that they've broken laws or whatever is that of the administration, who at first refused even to give us their names. And this, again, we established in the United States, you could not simply have a leader declare that somebody was a bad guy and make decisions about how that person was treated based on that idea. And this again goes back to our founding.
Exactly. And that's allow me to give you a tiny piece of the Declaration of Independence. I think most people know the Declaration of Independence for the preamble with the, when in the course of human events. But the meat of the document is the he has, which all refers to King George, the King of England, and it's accusing him being a tyrannical king, and it lists all the things that he has done to the colonists that the colonists believe were tyrannical and improper and violating their rights. And I just wanted to offer you a few of them that are smack in the middle of the text of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, so they are angry at him, quote, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. Not so good. For depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury. Okay, so this 1776, this is in essence, the British common law. And these people know that they are due a trial by jury. For transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. Right. And in that case, what they're complaining about is maybe they've been charged with something. Perhaps there's something to do with smuggling or this, something at sea. And rather than have them have a trial by jury where they are, they're taken away, far away from where they're from, far away from everyone they know, to admiralty courts in England. So what these particular aspects of the Declaration of Independence are about are the colonists saying, you are depriving us of fundamental rights that we have. Trial by jury, to have a trial here where we are, not far away in some foreign land. They are making the case in the document that in essence establishes this country, that due process, that this kind of trial is fundamental, and that a king who takes those things away is a tyrant and in essence has unkinged himself.
So this is I think it's easy for us to think about what it looked like in the 17th century or the early 18th century. The idea of losing the ability to be tried by your peers is also incredibly important, because think of what that means. If you're a peasant or somebody who's very poor, you don't want to be tried by, rich barristers. You want actually people who live with you to understand what's happened and whether or not your behavior was so far out of line that you should be sent to prison, or sent to, what did they do to people in Britain in that time? Jail. And didn't you have to go into the Navy and stuff?
I suppose that was something they could do to punish you, put you in the Navy and force you to serve in the very unpleasant place of the British Navy.
Yeah, the British Navy was a bad place to be. But you think about it in the modern world. Think about dictators like Vladimir Putin, or Bashar al-Assad in Syria before he was deposed. They could just look at somebody and say, I don't like the way you talk. I want to punish your parents. That's a biggie. I want to, I want to make you do what I want you to do. And the way that I can do that is just by calling you a criminal. Not even by necessarily putting your finger on the scales at a trial, but simply saying, you are an enemy of the state. And in fact, the president of the United States, Donald Trump, has done that very recently by suggesting that Miles Taylor, who wrote he was the guy who did the anonymous thing in the New York Times, I guess it was, where he talked about there being resistance within the Trump administration. He later wrote a book about it. And Trump suggested that that was treasonous because it was undermining faith in the government. Now, if a leader can do that and throw you in prison for that, you have no rights at all, and you don't have a democracy.
Precisely, because no evidence, a random charge, because the president or a king has decided they don't like you, they make a charge against you, you get thrown into prison. So the people who are looking at what's going on now in El Salvador and are saying this could happen to any of us, this isn't escalation. This isn't people like, as it's so popular to say, like, well, you're becoming hysterical. This is a simple fact. If anyone can be picked up and transported with no evidence, no charge, no trial, no due process, that can happen to any of us. It can. And if due process is being denied, we can't point to it and say, well, that's my right. I deserve it. We are looking at a moment right now where that is being denied to people. And we are in the midst of figuring out what that means and exactly what's going to happen. But that denial, the fact that that can't be, in a sense, taken for granted as a fundamental right of people on American soil, that's pretty huge.
Can I ask you, is this, for me, the big moment, that really stood out to me was when the Supreme Court decided that the president could not be prosecuted for crimes committed during his official duties. And that was July 1st of 2024. And it was Donald J. Trump versus the United States. And that to me was like, holy crap. Now we're in for it, because that gets rid of the rule of law, the idea that we're all equal under the law.
Right.
Is this how you're reacting to, or is that how you're reacting to this, or were you already there?
I was already there with the immunity decision from the Supreme Court, and actually you and I talked at the time or texted or something and said, this fundamentally changes the nature.
Our texts are so exciting, you guys.
Woo!
Doesn't this remind you of Andrew Johnson?
But in this case, we were both like, well, this just fundamentally changed the nature of American government, which it did. It just, by making the president immune, it's essentially striking down the rule of law in a really blatant kind of a way. I happened to be on a Zoom call with a bunch of historians, and we had all taken part. We'd all contributed to an amicus brief about this. And after that decision came down, we were told, like, okay, come on, let's all come together and see what we're thinking. And I will never forget the expression on the faces of all of the historians there on that Zoom screen of just dumbfounded at what had just been decided, and the degree to which, no, there isn't a founding for that of any kind in the Constitution or early America. Early America was about forming a government that could fight against a tyrant, that was going to protect that kind of power. That's what they talked about all the time, right? They didn't like demagogues because demagogues could take power and then make themselves into tyrants and just do whatever they wanted. They were constantly worried about one person with too much power.
Well, and the other side of that, of course, is, which I should have said under due process, is under our system, the government has to prove its case against you. You are presumed innocent until proven guilty. And sometimes that really frustrates people because people that we have a pretty good sense probably did something, walk away. But the government has to prove its case against you. And I was actually just talking to someone about this the other day who was on a case, on a jury, and said, the government just didn't prove its case. We all thought the person probably did it, but the government didn't prove its case. And we need that because otherwise you get these kangaroo courts that you see where, they find a journalist guilty of whatever. I think that's a really important part of it too. Now, one of the things that has bothered me a lot in the last couple of days is the degree to which the administration is working to turn all of so this is not just about Kilmar Abrego Garcia, by the way, it's all those people deserve due process. That's the way we work. But I'm going to focus on him because I think he's being used to represent all of those people. The degree to which they are taking a man who has never been charged with a crime and insisting that he is a criminal, that he is violent, that he is a member of the MS-13 gang. At one point, Caroline Leavitt of the White House press secretary said that he accused him with absolutely no evidence of being a human trafficker. And what that said to me was they have reached the part of dehumanizing an other, that there's a catch-all group who, if they look a certain way or have a certain kind of characteristic, like being undocumented, by definition, even if they've never broken a law, even if they've, had a full-time job, even if there's no evidence of gang activity, all that stuff, they are by definition those people. And we've seen that before too.
We certainly have. And that doesn't just ever apply to one group of people, ever, right? I mean, it can apply to anyone at any moment, any group that rubs someone the wrong way. So, in this case, I think sometimes along the lines of what you're saying, Heather, the administration is trying to focus on the question of his guilt, right? Oh, he's guilty. They created this tattoo, this sort of fake image of a tattoo on.
It was so weird.
It was weird and kind of pathetic and scary too. But what they're focused on is making him look guilty as though that solves this problem. And it doesn't matter if he's innocent or guilty. What matters is that he deserves a trial. He deserves due process with evidence to prove that he's innocent or guilty. If you're denied due process and you're picked up and they say, you're not a citizen, we're tossing you out, without due process, you don't get a chance to step forward and say, yeah, I am. Actually, I am a citizen. You're denied that fundamental right. So, I do think the immunity decision from the Supreme Court was my moment of sort of realizing where we were. But this moment, it feels like the ground is shifting underneath us to some degree. It feels as though there's some fundamental, not that I'm feeling stable to begin with, but some fundamental stability that's being tested right now.
Do you know what it reminds me of? And I might actually write about this because I never write about it for many reasons. It feels like the Salem witch trials. One of the things about the Salem witch trials they were 1692 to 1693, that always freaks me out is that there are many reasons that historians believe the people who were singled out as witches they tended to be women who didn't have protectors. They tended to be hostile toward a new minister. They were in a different part of town than other people. There's all these reasons that people look to. There's the whole idea that they were eating rust, root, whatever that was.
Right.
But if you read the testimony of those witch trials, what really absolutely horrifies you, is that there would be people, women usually, who were walking down a road, and 3 or 4 days later, the person who lived in that road, their cow would die. and they would say, it's her fault. She gave the cow the evil eye, and the cow died. And they would take the things that were happening in their lives. And you might have walked down that road 3 days before thinking about, what you were going to make for dinner. And all of a sudden you're on, your life is at stake because somebody said, you looked at my cow funny. And this idea that you could have the president of the United States saying, you looked at my cow funny, and you're going to spend the rest of your life not deported, which is what when
Right.
you do with an undocumented citizen,
I didn't even mention this part, right?
but
In
set
a foreign prison.
it for life, for without a trial. I'm sorry, my voice is getting high because it is unconscionable to me.
It is, and the president is paying them
Our money.
our money to keep them imprisoned. I mean, yeah. So my voice isn't getting high, but I'm at the same place as you, is that it's so beyond the beyond as far as something that is unconstitutional, unallowable, and un-American fundamentally, and endangers all of us so much that I'm glad to see Democrats going over there. I'm glad to see the story not being allowed to drift into, oh, he's a criminal, he deserves this. I think the important part, just as you and I are talking about here, Heather, is to remember what it means to have due process, to not take that for granted, and what it means to be denied it.
Yeah. I'm really glad you called this one out, because you do see the administration trying to spin this as, oh, people who are complaining about this want murderers and rapists in their communities, which is stupid, right? But focusing on the fact, as you just said so well, it doesn't matter if he's innocent or if he is guilty or not guilty. Nobody's innocent. If he's guilty or not guilty, that really doesn't matter. What matters is the process, and the fact that people have the right to confront the state and say, show me, prove that I'm a member of MS-13. The obvious answer, of course, being, if they had the evidence, they could have used the courts.
Right.
Anyway, do you have anything else to add on that, my dear?
I don't think I do. I think we both ranted sufficiently at how outraged we are about this.
Yeah, there are so many things to be outraged about these days. And one of the things that I think is important is to focus on the things that are, I mean, you and I are pretty good at the history and the guardrails. And then, of course, everybody should pick a lane, and figure out what is really upsetting them and make their voices known on that. Because, of course, we can't all do everything. But this one's a biggie. And that whole crap about you guys just want to have gang members in America, that's such a red herring. And it's so offensive, especially when they're talking about a man who has never been charged with a crime.
Right. So, no, it's true. I like your idea of sort of picking your lane of outrage. But, bearing in mind, I talk about this all the time, bearing in mind the things that it's easy to assume or take for granted, and that right now is a moment when we should take nothing for granted.
Isn't it awful?
Pardon?
Isn't it awful?
Yes.
I mean, even having to think about this, but I'll stop being negative. Now's the time to speak up and
yes,
back, and we're doing it.
That's precisely it. That and which is how I responded to that post in the first place. Was, are you kidding me?
Yes, and I have to say, I think it's a sign of how much people are putting into this effort that you and I still keep working on this expletive technology. But you know what? We're so close to having it nailed. We're so close to having it nailed.
We are. I mean, yeah, I won't mention the 7 minutes I spent on my YouTube channel trying desperately with very kind people in the comments that you can do it, Joanne. Nah.
Well, we will figure it out before the summer when your semester ends. Hey, when does your semester end?
This is the last week.
Oh, well, there you go. We'll figure it out next week, and we'll make these regular and be more organized about making it happen. Because I think these discussions are important,
I agree. And I'm here for it.
All right. Well, have a lovely evening, my dear. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for calling me up.
You too, and I'll see you soon.
All right. Love you, Joanne.
Love you too.
Bye.
Bye.